right, hi everyone. I think I'm live. I hope I'm live and I remembered to push the record button again today. All right, I hope everyone is doing well. Not sure how I'm going to find, I always have this problem, not sure how I'm going to find any questions that come in. Okay, right, that might work. Okay, I had quite a few questions for today. So thanks to everyone who sent them in. I was going to start off today just talking about protein, and then that will go well into the questions that I've got. I think that protein is one of the most important macronutrients that we have. We have protein, carbs, and fats. And I tend to think of protein more as being a nutrient, and carbs and fats as more as being our energy and where our calories come from. So although we get some calories from protein, we use them in a very different way than we do the other two. And we don't really store calories from protein in our body. So I have my nutrient to energy reset. And so that's how I look at our nutrition. We're making sure we're getting all the nutrients, the amino acids, the fatty acids, the vitamins and the minerals on one side of the equation. And then we need to balance out the energy that we need in order to have enough energy to make enough ATP to run the system. But all those nutrients keep that chemical factory going. So today I want to talk to you about how much protein you need, and it depends on your age, what you're doing, and your health status. And if you go and have a look on my website, and I'll see, I think I brought it up so I could share it with you. So on my website, I have a handy guide to protein requirements, and it's just a little PDF. It's free to download, and you can look through that. And I've tried to keep it reasonably simple. And then you can have a look at all the different age groups for boys and girls and infants, you know, right up to adults and older people and men and women. So I suggest you go and have a look at that and use that as a guide to help you figure out your protein content. Now, one of the things that people get muddled up is what exactly is 30 grams of protein, for example. So they think that if, you know, people often think if you weigh a piece of meat and it's 30 grams, that's giving you 30 grams of protein, but it's not, okay? That meat's got all sorts of other things in it. So it would take approximately 120 gram piece of meat in order to get 30 grams of protein. And as a general rule, we need about 30 grams of protein each time we eat in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And I don't want to make this sound too complicated. And you might be asking, so why do we want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis? And that's because muscle is really where we store our amino acids. And when we're not eating, between eating, you know, if we're sleeping overnight or if we're fasting, our bloodstream still needs to have all those essential amino acids in it so our body can continue to function properly and do what it's meant to do. And so we get that from our stores of protein in our muscle. And you know, when people go into starvation, they start actually they break down muscle, but they also start breaking down their gut lining, their neurotransmitters to access those amino acids that we need. Now, the reason we need 30 grams, or as we get older, like for myself, I need more than 30 grams per meal because just getting older, I don't. Digestion isn't so much. I need a bit more stimulus to get to make more muscle. The reason is because of a limiting protein or a limiting amino acid in there called leucine. And in order to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, you've got to have 2.5 grams to 3 grams of leucine each time you eat protein. And if you don't get that, you're not going to stimulate your muscle protein synthesis. So that's where that 30 grams comes from. So if you're eating less than 2.5 grams of leucine, then those amino acids, that protein you're eating isn't really going to help with muscle protein synthesis or with the amino acid stores in your body. So you can become protein deficient, even though you might think that you're eating lots of protein. You know, you might have a bit of little slice of chicken at lunch, or, you know, you might be thinking that you're getting it in, but you're just not getting the right volume and quantities in. And so that's quite important. So for example, you know, lots of people will say, well, I'll have a couple of poached eggs for breakfast on toast. And that's not enough protein. You probably need 4 eggs. If you're only going to eat eggs as your protein source, you probably need 4 eggs to be able to get enough protein to make a difference. And we know that protein is one of the most satiating foods. So the more that we eat, the better our protein intake is, the more satiated we are, and the less likely we're going to be to go around seeking out other foods. And that all comes back to a hypothesis called the protein leverage theory, where, you know, when you eat sometimes and then you just, you know, you finish a meal and then you think, oh, I've just eaten, but why am I still hungry? Well, the reason for that might be that you're not getting enough nutrients. So those amino acids could be one of them, and then the other vitamins and minerals that come in with that protein as well. So my advice to people really is, I try not to get too hung up on what you're eating, because making changes to your nutrition can be really challenging, you know, and we sort of have habits and we have lifestyles. So I like to think about adding things in rather than taking things away. So I like to talk about, make sure, you know, if you're going to come home after work and have, you know, some wine and some chippies or something, you can keep doing that, but add in some protein first. So come home and have, you know, that, you know, 100 grams or 120 grams of chicken, or, you know, have some hard-boiled eggs and some cheese or something like that, just to try and get that protein in, and then enjoy your glass of wine and, you know, your piece of chocolate afterwards. Anyway, I hope that helps, and that handy guide to protein requirements is there for you to go and download and have a look at, and by all means, ask me any questions that you have about it. Right, other questions that came in this week. One of the questions was about tinnitus, ringing in your ear. And that was from Sharon. So thanks, Sharon. And you just wondered if I had any ideas about what might cause that and what you could do about it. And boy, I know that is such a major problem for people, and so many people suffer from that. And, you know, as a nutritionist, health coach, it's a real frustrating one. But one of the things about tinnitus, when you look in the research, is that it often shows up with pre-diabetes. So you may not even know that you've got sugar problems. You may not know that there's any imbalances in your glucose and insulin, but there is quite a lot of evidence, and I did look it up. 92% of people who had tinnitus had hyperinsulinemia. So that means your insulin levels were way too high, but their blood sugars looked normal, but they had really high insulin. So 92% of people is quite a lot. And then Meniere's disease is another reason why you may have, you know, that constant ringing in your ear. And 72% of people diagnosed also had a problem with their insulin, also had really high insulin. So I would say if that's an ongoing problem for you and you're not able to resolve it, maybe get your glucose, fasting glucose and insulin tested and have a look and see whether your insulin is out of range or not. And if it is, then, we can work on your nutrition to help get that back into range. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute because I've got some blood tests to talk about as well. But insulin often goes up and gets out of range and becomes dysfunctional years, decades before you end up with a glucose problem. So unless you're testing, unless your GP will test, you won't know. All right. My next question was from Sarah, and it was, I've had my gallbladder removed due to having constant gallstones, and now I've read that that's not such a good thing, and I can't eat fat. Do you have any kind of solutions? She had quite a long email about what had been going on, so I won't read it all out. But anyway, basically Sarah was getting recurring gallstones, and she had a gallbladder removed, which is pretty common. And so then that does make it more difficult to eat fat. Now I do have, I think on one of my YouTube somewhere, I think I've got something about gallstones and gallbladder, but the gallbladder is really the place where we store all the things that come from our liver, like our bile salts, our bile and cholesterol, and we store them. And when we eat fat, then we release it so that we can break down the fat that we've eaten. So if we're not eating fat, if we're eating a low-fat diet, which a lot of people are doing, trying to be healthy, then we don't release the bile, and then it gets really thick, and then we start building up and making gallstones, which are pretty painful and pretty horrible to have. And so the solution to that, the doctors will often remove your gallbladder. Problem then, of course, is that you need to eat fat. Fat is really healthy and important. And then it becomes a bit more difficult. But over time, you can train your liver to kind of take over that job. So the liver does pick up, it will still make those necessary elements, and it will produce what you need. And you can supplement that in the beginning with taking sort of bile salts, ox bile or something like that. So you can supplement with that in your diet. But you need to eat little bits of fat. So I wouldn't go out there going total low carb, high fat in the beginning, but just start slowly introducing some fat and teaching yourself to eat that. Because when you've got that low fat, you really slow down that emptying. And that can be a problem with when your gallbladder's been removed as well, because a low-fat diet will increase the cholesterol in your liver, and then that will make the bile that gets released even thicker and harder to kind of pump out. So just start training your body to eat some fat, perhaps use some ox bile or some other digestive enzymes to help you, and just gradually work towards improving the status of your gallbladder. What other questions did I have? Peter wrote to me. Thanks, Peter, for your email, and we had a bit of correspondence about it. So Peter wrote about vegetable oils and kind of challenged me on my saturated fat, let's eat saturated fat and let's not eat vegetable oils. And it's great to be challenged on these things. So he wanted to know why I don't like vegetable oils. And he pointed out that omega-6 and omega-3 are really essential in our diet, and they are. And I think if we get them from food, that's fine. You know, if you're eating meat, eggs, fish, things like that, they're coming in that beautiful balance. And we sort of want a 2-to-1 ratio, 1-to-1, 2-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, you know, maybe up to a 4-to-1, even 6-to-1, perhaps. The research is a bit sort of variable in that. But when we start eating these vegetable oils, some of them have, you know, 23-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. And our bodies aren't really designed to handle all that linoleic acid. So when we have small amounts, we can burn it in our mitochondria, produce some nice clean energy. And as Peter pointed out to me, and, you know, in the research, it shows that if you eat vegetable oil, your cholesterol comes down. So that's another subject to talk about. It does, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. So the problem with these vegetable oils is they produce aldehydes, and when we've got too much of them coming in, it's really hard to burn them cleanly as energy, and they produce aldehydes like 4-HNE and sort of other oxidative stresses, inflammatory compounds that change the function of our cells. They change how our cells replicate, they affect our DNA, and 4-HNE is closely associated with cancer. So we want 4-HNE working properly and doing its job properly to help protect us from cancer. So when we have a whole lot of these vegetable oils in, we're changing the function of that and kind of increasing our risk of cancer. They also, too much omega-6 makes our fat cells grow too big as well. So we end up with fat cell hypertrophy. So we've got two ways. Oops, my computer's going to go flat. Plug it in. Sorry about that. That should work. So when we store fat, we can either make our fat cells bigger, which is hypertrophy, or we can make new fat cells, which is hyperplasia. And most of us just hypertrophy our fat cells. So when we get to sort of in our 20s, the number of fat cells we have is what we're going to have. And we will just make them bigger and bigger rather than make new fat cells. So the people who can make new fat cells, and we do see those, and they can become very, very obese without getting diabetes or without getting sick, because they're safely storing all this energy in these new fat cells they make. But when our fat cells just get bigger and bigger, they eventually get to a stage where the fatty acids start to leak out. We have all these inflammatory cytokines leak out, and they get into our bloodstream, they go to our other cells, and they start causing a lot of damage around our body, and they make us insulin resistant as well. So normally insulin tries to hold the fat in your fat cells, and now insulin can't do that. So our fat cells become insulin resistant, then the other cells in our body start to become insulin resistant. And we're letting out all these kind of chemicals and also hormones as well start getting released around our body. So that's one of the reasons why we want to keep, we don't want to end up with over fat cells. And that's one of the reasons also why different ethnic groups have different tolerances for, say, carbohydrates in their diet, or they get diabetes at a lot lighter weight than other groups. So if we look at Asian populations, they get diabetes much more quickly than, say, a European population would do at a lighter weight. And that's because they've got less capacity to hold fat in their fat cells, and they become insulin resistant a lot quicker. I think I've got some comments, so I'll just have a look and see. Hey Jane, how are you? Nice to see you. Andrew, great. Thanks for popping that into the chat. You're really good at keeping me on the ball about that stuff. Hey Leanne. Okay, Frankie, thanks for logging in. Hi Sue, if you have time, do you have any solutions for shaking off a plateau in fat loss? Yes, it's really challenging, isn't it? And sometimes you've just got to shake things up a little bit. Sometimes if we're really, really rigid about our diets and, you know, we're doing really well and we're really trying to just eat the same foods and be really good, sometimes that can cause a bit of a plateau, just as, I don't know, the metabolic way our body works. So sometimes eating a few more calories, so if you've been severely calorie restricting, sometimes a few more calories can just allow your body to relax and go, oh, I'm not going to starve to death. There's plenty of food coming in. I can use that. So I can use that fat for fuel. So sometimes alternating calories, and I think this is particularly useful for women. And I've talked the last couple of weeks about our cycle and how we want to alternate our calories during when you're cycling, when you're having your period. So there's some times of the month when you want to have a few more calories, and then there are other times of the month where you can be a lot more restrictive. So when your estrogen is going up, so after you've had your period and your estrogen starts to climb, estrogen likes fat. Estrogen doesn't like insulin so much. That's where you can eat a higher fat diet, and you can do maybe a little bit more of calorie restriction overnight. So maybe increase your fasting window, the window that you're eating your food in. And then as you go through your month, as your progesterone goes up, then progesterone likes a little bit more carbohydrate. It's not so fat friendly. So then you might want to just add in a little bit more carbohydrate and give that progesterone a chance to do what it likes to do. And so it's about cycling, and you'll find that your weight loss won't be linear. It's never purely linear. Very seldom you'll find you'll lose, you'll plateau, you might go up a little bit, you'll lose some more, you'll plateau. Now, if you get really stuck, I think this is where careful fasting, looking at your how you respond individually can be helpful. So there's a whole lot of stuff out there about fasting, and everyone's fasting, and I think it has some real value, but with caution, because we still don't really have the evidence for it properly. But fasting can be an opportunity to just kickstart that stalled weight loss. Now, don't go really hard out, just start gently, just maybe start with a few days of time restricted eating, and maybe compress that window for a little bit more. If you're really new to it, 12 on, 12 off. Don't eat during the hours of darkness, try and eat during daylight hours. I know it's a bit hard if you've got family and kids, but try not to eat during the night. Try and give yourself 12 hours without food. And that will come to another question that I had about mTOR, which I haven't got to yet. So a little bit of fasting, and then you could go to, depending on how you're tolerating it, you could go to a 16-8 fast or 18-6 fast, but don't stick there all the time every day. Sometimes add in a few more calories so your body can just kind of have that relief that it's not always going to be calorie restricted. And then do try and eat your meals at reasonably regular times each day as well, because we have this circadian clock and that likes to know what's going on. So try those things. Let me know if they help. Yeah, and make sure you're getting enough protein, because protein can be key as well. And if you're doing sort of a more keto diet where you've got higher fat, just maybe cut back on that energy a little bit. So we'll often lose a lot of weight when we go to a low carb diet. We lose a lot of water weight. We stop storing so much body fat from having high insulin. And then as our energy balance kind of comes in to match our energy output a bit more, we could plateau. So just have a look at your fat and make sure you're just not, there's not always a free for all for fat. Sometimes you might need to cut back on that fat a little bit, just to see if that helps. So just try some of those things and see how it goes. I have a question from Paulette. About the good oil, cold pressed extra virgin rapeseed oil. This must be healthier product than the processed stuff. I don't mind olive oil used cold. There's, so many different sort of opinions around this and not always a lot of facts. So my personal opinion is I don't really use oil. I don't use oils. I use saturated fats, animal fats. And if you want to make sauces and things like that, I would be really inclined to try and use good olive oil, maybe avocado oil is probably quite acceptable as well. But yeah, Paulette, I'll just be really careful around those oils. But then it depends on what your main problem is. Like sometimes, is that the biggest bang for your buck you can get with your health? So, using those oils may not be the biggest problem. There may be other things, but I presume you're just asking just about whether it is a safe oil to use or not. I just think be really careful with adding too many processed oils into things. It's super easy, so many recipes have a cup of oil, when you make a chocolate cake and it's so easy to really overconsume those, especially when they're added with sugar. Whereas if you're eating butter, the fat off your steak, the fat off your salmon, it's really hard to overconsume those. And they really are in that balance of 1-to-1, 2-to-1, omega-6 to omega-1 fatty acids. So thanks for your question. Hey, Dave, awesome to see you. Been a while. I hope you and Nancy are doing great. Yep, Gay, you've done amazing. It's fantastic, wonderful, wonderful physical recovery from your hip surgery. Dave, yes, extra virgin is definitely better than standard oil, absolutely. And, like I was saying with Paulette, just try and use olive oil if you can, or avocado oil. That's really great. Yeah, it was a week ago, guys. So that's so amazing that you're home, you're up and down those stairs, and a real credit to the fact that you're 78, but you have kept yourself so fit and strong. You've been lifting weights for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. You have your mountain biking. and you've been on a really good healthy diet, and that just shows in your wonderful recovery. So well done. All right, another question that got emailed into me is about mTOR, and I'm definitely not an mTOR specialist at all, but it is something that I have a little bit of interest in, but I wouldn't say I know a huge amount about mTOR. For those of you who are interested in mTOR, so mTOR stands for mammalian target of rapamycin. It's a small m, capital TOR. And so some of the people doing really good research in mTOR is Dr. David Sinclair, so you can look him up, and Professor Matt, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name, Kaberlein, 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 I think is the spelling. So these people are doing research into anti-aging, because mTOR has been looked at because of its aging properties, and there's a whole lot of talk around about we need to reduce our protein because protein stimulates mTOR, and then mTOR makes us age and gives us cancer and things like that. And like most things in the nutrition world, some of it there's an element of truth to it, but it's way more complex and needs to be balanced out a lot more than that. So mTOR helps us build up. It's an enzyme that tells other proteins what to do. So when we exercise is a time when we stimulate mTOR, and we stimulate really good mTOR, because when we exercise and stimulate mTOR, we build muscle. It makes our brain function better, and it makes our hearts stronger and function better. So we kind of want to stimulate mTOR. And when we exercise, it reduces the amount of mTOR in our liver and in our fat cells. So it balances, and it's really good. And it comes up for a little while and then it goes down again. And food stimulates mTOR as well. So everyone talks about protein and amino acids, and yep, they certainly turn on our mTOR, but so does insulin, so does fatty acids. And insulin is probably a lot worse than protein or amino acids, because when we eat, our amino acids levels go up, and then they'll drop down again, and then our mTOR will come down. But when we've got really high insulin all the time that we don't know that we have mTOR turned off constantly. And when mTOR is turned on constantly, that is probably when it's starting to contribute to our health problems, things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancers, and things like that. So it's really about finding that balance in it, and not being afraid of it. It's a good thing. Like, our body is full of these regulatory systems that all work in conjunction with each other, and they're supposed to. When you look at insulin and glucagon, when we eat and we've got lots of energy in our bloodstream and our glucose has gone up, insulin will come up, and that'll help get our glucose bloodstream back to normal with its energy levels. It'll take that glucose and put it into cells. And then when we haven't eaten for a while, insulin will get low and glucagon will come up, and glucagon will help us make blood sugar out of our, the glycerol of our fatty acids, or from breaking down protein to make glucose. So it's always this beautiful balance, and mTOR is much the same. So there's tons of research been done into it in the anti-aging community, and lots of speculation as always. But yeah, I just don't think it's worth getting really focused down on some real narrow kind of track when we have so many other options at hand that we can use to help our health. And the other thing I'll say about mTOR is, if you are fasting overnight, if you're not eating for 12 hours or 14 hours or 16 hours, your mTOR is going to be really low. So, you know, we want that period of growth. I certainly want to stimulate my mTOR. I want as much muscle as I can have. I want as much brain function as I can have. It helps with focus and cognition. And I definitely want good heart function. So I'm not worried about my mTOR, because I know that I have long periods of time when I'm not eating, I'm not stimulating mTOR, and hopefully keeping it all in balance. So I hope that helps a bit. Yep, I think that was about it with the questions that came in. That looks like it in the chat questions. So what I'll do now is I've put some blood tests into my spreadsheet. So I'll see if I can find them. Right. So I want to say thanks to Michelle for letting me share these. I thought that they would be good ones to share. And this, I'm not sure what you can see of that, but anyway, you can see there's orange, blue, and green. So orange means that the marker is high, blue means the marker is low, and green means the marker is in the normal range. And just remember that my markers are optimal ranges. They aren't those extended laboratory ranges that you get when you get back from the lab. So these are tighter, and these are about whether you're in that good health and that, or whether you've gone into that suboptimal range, or in some cases they will be in the lab ranges. So we have a case here of, if we have a look at Michelle's fasting glucose, we can see that it's high. So she'd fasted for 14 hours before she had this blood test done. And now her HbA1c is 35, which is good. And her GP had measured her HbA1c because she'd gone along. She said, I'm really tired. I'm putting on weight. She's 50, I remember how old she is, 50 something, 53. So Michelle's 53, putting on weight. And they talked about it probably being menopause and estrogen, and did she need some hormonal replacement therapy? And then she came in and had a chat to me. So we thought we'd have a look at some bloods first. So we can see that her fasting glucose is a bit out of range, but her HbA1c is good. Now, her GP only did her HbA1c and said there's nothing wrong with your blood sugars. But when we have a look at her insulin here, her insulin is 123. That's after 14 hours of fasting. Our target is about 18, and our range goes up to 48. So, you know, she's definitely got really high insulin there all the time. And that insulin is going to stop Michelle. So overnight, when she's asleep and she's not eating and she's not taking in energy, she should be using some body fat to create the energy that she needs so that she can sleep through the night. But she can't, because her insulin is so high, the fat can't get out of her fat cells and get around her body. So it's been held in her fat cells. Her blood sugars will dip. She'll wake up in the night, you know, with kind of maybe a little bit of hypoglycemia. Her cortisol will go up, trying to make her increase her blood sugars, and then her insulin will stay high. So she ends up on this really vicious cycle. So then we sent Michelle back to have her postprandial glucose and postprandial insulin checked. And ideally, well, I mean, you don't really want to be doing oral glucose tolerance tests, you know, I mean, they're horrible to do, and, you know, they're really only really for people who you suspect have diabetes. But this is kind of my little home-baked version of it. I don't know if there's any evidence for it, but anyway, I find it quite helpful. So Michelle went and ate, and then 2 hours after she'd eaten, and I asked her just to eat a normal breakfast, she had her glucose and her insulin and her triglycerides tested, and we can see her glucose was 8.6, so it's taking a long time to come down in that 2 hours from eating, and we can see that her insulin is 893. Now that is really high. You know, we want that under 200 after 2 hours, and it's 893. So that would suggest to me that Michelle has some insulin resistance going on for some reason, and so we need to find a way of working through that and resolving that. And I'm just going to pop down to her. I'm going to pop down to her triglycerides, because they tell us how much fat you're storing from the glucose you're eating, and we can see after 14 hours of fasting, her triglycerides were 5.7. So that's really high. We want those under 0.9. So we need to figure out what's going on from there. And then 2 hours postprandial, they were 6.9. So they hadn't gone up very much, and we would expect them to go up after eating. So, you know, I think, you know, like with Michelle, you know, we're working towards kind of fixing the biggest bang for our buck first, and then we'll work down through the other things. So we can see her kidney function is a little bit low. And then we can see, so if we look at all her protein markers, her creatinine, her total protein, and her albumin, they are all low as well. So it's either she's not eating enough, she's not absorbing enough, or she's not utilizing it around her body properly. And so it's going to be a matter of trying to figure that out. But that means that she'll be burning through muscle, she'll be losing muscle mass, and then she'll feel even worse, because she'll feel like, she'll know she's losing muscle mass, and she'll feel like those fat stores are increasing. Her sodium, potassium, chloride were all great. Her magnesium was low. So again, these nutrient imbalances. Magnesium is essential for adrenal function. Magnesium is used by like 3,752. I remember that. 3,752, or maybe it's 58. Anyway, enzymes in the body. So when your magnesium is low, those enzymes can't function properly. And then her albumin is quite low. And albumin is a really important protein in the blood that transports all the nutrients around. So it, you know, it gets the nutrients into our cells. And so if it's really low, we can't get those nutrients into our cells. So no wonder Michelle feels absolutely exhausted. And we haven't got her iron and copper and zinc numbers back yet, but I'll be interested to see them. Then we see her globulin is high, just a little bit high, and that's often either a sign of not enough stomach acid, and that could be part of the problem as to why she's not digesting her protein and absorbing the amino acids properly. And then her albumin globulin ratio is out of whack as well. And then her alkaline phosphatase is also very low, and that's another enzyme that's used in multiple functions around the body. And when that's low, that's often a sign of malnutrition, nutrient imbalances, so phosphate, zinc, magnesium, vitamin C, folate, B12, copper. So when that's low, we know we need to go and kind of figure out what else is going on. Now, I don't often see this, but in Michelle's case, she has got all her liver enzymes are high, AST, ALT, and GGT. So that's kind of telling us that there's something going on in that liver, maybe some fatty liver, and this kind of warrants a little bit further discussion and investigation, and probably this is where we probably need to be talking to her GP and really trying to get her GP on board, just to have a look and make sure there's nothing sort of insidious going on there. We've looked at her triglycerides. So you can see her cholesterol total looks good, and yet her triglycerides are really high. Her HDL is low. So, we talked, that's the good cholesterol. That's, don't like talking about cholesterol as being good and bad, but anyway, that's what we call the good cholesterol. So that's a bit low. Her LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, is within normal ranges, but her ratios are out because that HDL is so low. And then one of the most important markers we have is this triglyceride HDL ratio. So Michelle is 4.19, and we want it under 0.87. So again, there could be a whole lot of reasons for that, sort of high blood pressure, high insulin levels, insulin resistance, maybe hypothyroid, lots of things going on. Now, the other reason why I really want Michelle to go back to her GP and have a conversation is because her CRP is 17. And the best test for CRP is HS-CRP, highly sensitive CRP, but anyway, it appears we're not testing that in New Zealand anymore. So actual CRP gives us an indication that there's inflammation going on. It doesn't tell us where it's coming from or why we have it or how long we've had it, whether it's chronic or acute. But in this case, 17 is quite high. And when I see those high elevations and all those liver enzymes, I definitely think we need a little bit of just making sure there's nothing insidious going on. Homocysteine. Now, homocysteine is one of the best markers for our heart health, despite path labs now writing that, reducing your homocysteine isn't going to make any difference. It's actually not what the research shows. So we want homocysteine around 6 or 7. Michelle's is 15, and homocysteine has a lot to do with the B vitamins, vitamin B12, and your methylation, your ability to methylate properly. So again, we're coming back to nutrient deficiencies, and then, hey, look at her B12, really low, and it's unbelievable that this is actually within the range, the doctor's range. We kind of want our B12 to be around between 500 and 800. So 202 is really low. And I think PathLab's range is 201. So it didn't have a cross on it. And a GP said your B12 is fine, which just makes me want to spew. The best test for B12 is methylmalonic acid. Because when we test in the serum, we don't always know what's getting into the cell. So sometimes it might look low in the serum, but your cell might actually have healthy levels. That test costs about $120, and the path lab won't, the GP wouldn't allow it, and path lab won't let you do it anyway. And then Michelle's hemoglobin was 155. So I'm not allowed to do any sort of diagnosis, but for me, that looks a lot like dehydration. And that isn't dehydration that you're not drinking enough. That's kind of the dehydration that the mitochondria in your cells are not producing energy cleanly, and you're not making enough metabolic water. So when we make energy in our mitochondria, we want the byproduct of that. We want ATP, so it's magnesium ATP, so that's why magnesium is so important. And we want the byproduct of that to be water, H2O. And if you're not making water there, if you're making hydrogen peroxide, for example, you're going to have a lot of reactive oxygen species, a lot of oxidative stress, and that can show up in things like your hemoglobin being high through dehydration. So, yeah, so those were the blood tests I wanted to go through today. No other questions have come in. Haven't done too bad. I've talked for nearly 45 minutes again. So if there are no other questions, thanks very much, everybody, for coming, and thanks to everyone who's been emailing me your questions. It's been really great seeing the increase in numbers of questions and the range of questions and how well educated people are about some of these things. And I just want to say next, I'm going to do 3 more of these lives at 12:30 on a Wednesday, and then see how they go from there. But on the 29th of April, I just want to let everyone know I'm going to run a mini event. Andrew might stick it in the chat for me because I'm hopeless. But it's kind of about 6 small steps to health. It's going to be a 3-hour event. It's free participation. I'm sorry it's on a Saturday morning, but you know, it's really hard to pick a time for these things. So I'll make sure that I do actually get the link out and you can log in, and it's going to be kind of an interactive event, and we're just going to have a overview look at some of the small steps you can do to improving your health and restoring your energy. So yeah, I look forward to seeing everybody show up there. All right, thanks for the questions, and yeah, hope to see you next week. Bye.